in museums, libraries, art centers, retirement communities, universities, and private schools. Please welcome Marlene Aron.
Thank you, Paul. I love being here, and I'm really happy to be back. Are my friends from 1974 here? I have people I met whose house I rented. Are they here?
In 1 year. Oh, no.
Anyway, there's a couple who I've seen once since the 80s. In 1974, when I started researching Van Gogh, I rented a house in Noe Valley, San Francisco, and they said they would be here. And are they here? No, not yet. Okay. Anyway, hi, thank you. Am I being filmed? Hi. Okay, so, we should probably turn the lights out, and I can get the light on here. It's true, I started studying Van Gogh in 1974, and I've been presenting lectures. I taught art and art history at Penn State and Youngstown State and CCA and City College in San Francisco, and I've been giving workshops and courses on Van Gogh. So, anyway, this is a self-portrait he did in I have to get myself out of the 1900s, 1887 in Paris. He did 39 self-portraits altogether in his life, and 31 of them in Paris. So, I always start my lecture with my favorite quote by Van Gogh, which is, Van Gogh said, "Your profession is not what brings home your weekly paycheck. Your profession is what you were put here on earth to do with such passion and such intensity that it becomes spiritual and calling." It's nice, huh? So, Vincent van Gogh had two purposes in life: to serve God and serve humanity, and it was through his art that he was able to do both. And his whole purpose in life was to help other people, was to serve others, those less fortunate than himself, the poor, the struggling working class, vulnerable people, and he did that. And I'll show you. So this is where he was born, March 30th, 1853, in Zundert, in the southern part of the Netherlands. Holland is a province, but in the southern part of the Netherlands. And he was born in this room right there. And while I'm remembering, I have so much information because I've been studying for so long, so I don't read from my script, and I'm not real linear. Anyway, let me just say that about a year and a half, 2 years ago, I'll just do this or get this out of the way early. I was standing on the corner, waiting for a bus at the corner of Hague de Visadero in San Francisco, and there was a young couple standing there in their mid-30s with two small children. And I'm kind of friendly and talk to strangers, and we were waiting a long time for the bus, and I said, where are you from? Are you visiting? Yes, we're from Amsterdam. I said, ik live in Scheveningen for 2 jaar, and my 6 words of Dutch. And then I said, just to kind of bring us, connect a little, I said, now I lecture on Van Gogh. And he said, I'm a Van Gogh. I said, no. He said, yeah. He was very modest, very humble, very quiet. He said, I was born in Zundert, which is where this is, in the southern part of the Netherlands, and he's directly 4th or 5th generation related to one of the siblings of Vincent. And then I talked to their 2 children, who are named Doris and Lou, named after Doris Day and Louis Armstrong. And they gave me their card, and we've been in touch. But isn't that amazing? I mean, it's like just being at that one corner at that one time, waiting for that bus. I need a member of the Van Gogh family. Anyway. So this is where he was born, and then this is his mother, and Anna Cornelius van Gogh. The way you would say in Dutch is Van Gogh, Vincent Willem van Gogh. And on our right is a watercolor ink drawing she did when she was 25, so she liked to do art. Vincent van Gogh was brought up surrounded by art and religion his whole life. His father was a pastor. I don't have a picture of his father. His father was kind of grumpy. They didn't get along real well, but he got along with his mother very well. So his father was a pastor in the Protestant church. He had a great-grandfather who was a pastor. He had a great-grandfather who was a sculptor. He had 3 uncles who owned the largest and most prestigious chain of art galleries throughout Europe, in Berlin, 2 in Paris, London, The Hague, Brussels, and eventually a partner opened one in New York City in the early 1900s. So he was owned, and there was a cousin who was a painter in The Hague. So he liked art. He never thought about being an artist until the last 10 years before he died, the last 10 years of his life. So he was surrounded by art and religion. And this is his brother, Theo, who was 33 at the time. And he's the one who supported Vincent spiritually, emotionally, and financially, materially. And Van Gogh said, my paintings are as much a part, they're yours as much as mine, because without your help, I could never have done them. And Theo supported him for the last 12 or so years of his life. He sent Vincent money all the time to live on so that Vincent could buy supplies and food and have shelter. And there was another brother. There were 6 siblings altogether. There was another brother, and then there were 3 sisters. But Vincent was not the firstborn. I forgot to say this last time, so my friend over there is. So Vincent van Gogh was not the firstborn in his family, although he was the oldest. There was a child born before him 1 year earlier, and he died. He was stillborn, and they buried him on the family property. And the gravestone, so 1 year later to the day, March 30th, 1853, that Vincent van Gogh, we know as the painter, was born, and every day on the way to school, he would pass the gravestone with his name on it, of the baby that was died at birth. So, and then this is a drawing Vincent van Gogh did when he was 8. So, in all fairness, he actually did this from a magazine. It was a copy, and anyone who's done art knows that it's much easier to get something right if you're copying it. Everything that's already been figured out, the 3-dimensional aspect of it, the shading, perspective, everything. But still, at age 8, to be able to have the patience to do this much detail and to concentrate this much is pretty amazing. So he did that when he was 8. And then I'll show you now something he did when he was 10 from real life. And this is called Farm, Wagon, and Shed. And this was a birthday present. He did this drawing when he was 10, and it was a birthday present to his father. The other one was called The Bridge. So I'm going to show you 3 paintings, artists who influenced him, whose work he liked a lot. He really liked Rembrandt a lot. Rembrandt did a lot of drawings and etchings of peasants, the disabled, poor people, beggars. But he really liked this painting by Rembrandt. This is called The Jewish Bride. And he went to see it, and I don't think the Rijksmuseum was built yet. I'm not sure about that, which is where it's housed now. But he went to see this painting in a public space, and he went with a friend, and his friend, after a while, laughed. And he said, well, come back at the end of the day, because I'm going to spend the rest of the day here. And when his friend came back, he said, I would gladly give up, this is really interesting, I'd gladly give up 10 years of my life to stand beside this painting, in front of this painting for a fortnight with just a crust of bread. He would gladly give up 10 years of his life just to be able to be with this painting for a fortnight. So this is Rembrandt, and then he also admired the paintings by this man, Joseph Israels, who was Dutch, lived in the 1824 to 1911, spent time in Paris during the Impressionist era, but never adopted the colors and the light of the Impressionists. He was a Dutch artist, and you can see why Van Gogh would be attracted to this. It's called The Frugal Meal. And he wrote about this painting in a letter to his brother. And he was very attracted and had much empathy and compassion for poor people. And then his favorite artist is Jean-Francois Millet, and this is called The Angelus. And he collected reproductions and prints of Millet's work throughout his entire adult life. And Theo, who worked in, his brother, Theo, was 4 years younger than him, worked in one of their uncle's galleries, and would send him reproductions of artist work, but especially Millet. And he always had copies of Millet's art in his studio, on the studio walls. So here you have Van Gogh's two loves brought together, nature and peasants working their land. So this is a couple at the end of the day working their land, saying a prayer before they go in for their evening meal. So this is one of my favorite self-portraits of him. Vincent van Gogh only lived 37 years. And it was in the last 10 years of his life that he created 2,200 works of art. Age 27 to 37, 2,200 works of art. A lot of those were sketches and letters. He wrote over 800 letters in the last 12 to 14 years of his life, and 650 of them were to his brother, Theo. He wrote Theo at least one letter a day, except for the 2 years they shared an apartment together in Paris, 1886 to 1888. So it included not only sketches and letters, but oil paintings, watercolors, gouache, which is an opaque water-based paint, mixed media on paper with inks and charcoal and pastel and lithographic crayon. He also did an etching, and he did several lithographs. And he used to go out into marshes and pick reeds and carve down the tips to make his own holders for ink. So you'll see some really exquisite drawings in a little bit that show the sensitivity of line, and this was brought about not only because of his feelings inside, but also because of the reeds that he carved to hold different thick and thin ink. So he read, wrote, and spoke in 4 languages fluently: Dutch, of course, English, French, and German. And sometimes it was written after he died that he would be known to be hanging out with the artists in Paris, and he was so fluent and so comfortable with languages. He was speaking in French, of course, because he was in Paris, and then he would go to Dutch and English, one sentence after the other. He would just combine them all together. So some of the books he read, here are the authors, so you can get an idea of where his heart was. He read Charles Dickens. He read Uncle Tom's Cabin in English. He read Victor Hugo. He read Emile Zola. He read all of Shakespeare, and he read the Bible over and over again. He took piano lessons. He taught art for a while in The Hague. He was known to be a pretty good artist. His uncles hired him they commissioned him to do cityscapes in The Hague. And like I said, he studied piano, and he sold, I was trying to remember all the different things. I tell all the positive stuff, right? I haven't mentioned the ear yet, you know. I'd rather talk about all the, that he studied piano. He was commissioned to do a mural for a wealthy man's dining room wall outside of The Hague. He was a voracious reader. He liked poetry. 2 of his favorite poets were Walt Whitman and Longfellow. And you'll see he did 3 Starry Nights, and the second Starry Night was inspired by a poem by Walt Whitman. This is Van Gogh when he was around 12 or 13 years old, taken in Holland. When he was 12, his parents sent him away to a boarding school for better education, but I think it was really because he used to play outside in the cornfields and the woods behind their home with the other peasant children, and the parents wanted to get him away from the other peasant children and sent him to a boarding school. Oh, I forgot to mention that Vincent and his brothers and sisters used to go out and play in the forests and the cornfields, and he would bring in little bits of nature, seeds and pods and twigs and leaves, and he would draw them in the house. And bird's nests, he collected bird's nests throughout his entire adult life, and he always had a row of bird's nests on shelves in every studio that he rented. He lived in a lot of places. So when he was 16, this is when he's 18, here he is here, still looking kind of dapper without the beard. He was 18 or 19 here, and this was taken in Brussels when he was a clerk in one of the art galleries of his uncle. Like I said, he had 3 uncles that owned the largest, most prestigious chain of galleries throughout Europe. And when he was 16, it was thought that he should go earn his own living, and his parents sent him to work in one of the galleries. This is a house that he lived in. This is the Lawyer, L-O-Y-E-R is the family name, the Lawyer's house in London. A drawing he did in around 1873, 1874. It's a boarding house. And it was found 100 years later in an attic in this home. And what happened was, in 1973, Theo's son, named Vincent van Gogh, also named after his uncle, was scheduled to open the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam in 1973. And there was a journalist from England who was given the assignment. He had 2 weeks to go everywhere that Van Gogh lived and write an article for a magazine about Van Gogh. So he knew about this house. It was a very important house. This was a place where he lived, one of his early jobs, working for his uncles. So the journalist went, met some descendants of the family, and there was nothing they could tell him. And so he said, well, is there anything? Well, there's a cardboard box in the attic. You know, this thing about something valuable in the attic. He said, well, so there were old photographs, nothing with Van Gogh in them, but the family that he rented from in the 1870s. And they found this drawing. And what alerted the journalist is Van Gogh had a habit of drawing. Nearly every place he lived, he would make drawings of the homes or his studio, places he rented. And he also sent them back to his parents or a family member, or he would give them as a gift to the people he rented from. So they found this drawing in the attic, and they knew about the paper and the ink that was done probably 100 years earlier in the 1800s. And then also, the house didn't look like this 100 years later. This is how it looked in the 1870s. 100 years later, in 1973, this corner was missing. So the journalist asked the family if he could take it back to Amsterdam and meet with the member of the Van Gogh family, and it was authenticated to be a Van Gogh drawing. So this is where he lived. He lived here for several years. This is where he first became grumpy. He fell in love with the landlady's daughter, and she rejected him. So up until this time, he went to work at his uncle's gallery. Everything was fine. He was dressed all proper in a top coat, top hat. And on weekends, he would take little outings with the other boarders out into the countryside, or he would stand around a piano in the parlor in the evenings. Everything was very congenial and very good until the landlady's daughter rejected him. So then he went off to work at the gallery, and he was really grumpy and unhappy, and he was driving the clients away. That's bad. You don't want to buy that. So his uncle said, you know, you make your family, but you're driving our customers away. So he was transferred to a branch in Paris, and he really didn't like it. His whole purpose was to serve other people, to be of use to other people. Selling art in a gallery was not doing it for him. So he became obsessed with the Bible. He would go back to the room that he was renting in Paris and read the Bible. And then he read an article about there was a job opening in England where he could be a tutor without any pay to poor boys at a boys' boarding school. So he went there, got no pay, room and board. He taught French, German, and math. He was very smart, very well-read, well-educated, read all the time. So then he went to another boarding school and he taught there. For a while he was given a little compensation, and then he went back to Holland and he worked in a bookstore, but by then he really became obsessed with the Bible, and he would sit in the back room instead of stocking the bookshelves and make 3 lines, parallel lines, and translate the Bible word for word into 3 languages. So that didn't last too long. And then he thought, well, his father was after him to become a pastor in the Protestant church. So he decided to go to the School of Theology at the University of Amsterdam, and only he refused to take his exams in Latin and Greek. It's not that he couldn't have passed them. He just said to his teacher, what good will my knowing Latin and Greek do for the people I want to preach to and reach? They don't care if I know Latin and Greek. So he failed at that by his own accord. And then, so I'm getting to how he became an artist. It's really interesting. So then they transferred him to, they saw he was really serious about wanting to do the will of the Word of God, to help other people. So they sent him to the poorest mining camp in Belgium called the Parsonage. And this is where he was to study to be an evangelist. So having a kind of a nice little room to rent and nice clothes and preaching on Sunday was not enough. He would get up 3, 4 in the morning, go down into the mines with the miners, stay down there with them, come up when it was already dark again. If there were accidents, he would tear off part of his clothes and dipped it in oil and bandaged their, when they hurt themselves with accidents. And then not only that, he gave up his comfortable room that he was renting and moved into some kind of little shack like the miners were living in. He gave away all of his clothes, all of his food, and all of his furniture. He kept one nice little piece of clothing for Sunday preaching, and the rest was just some rags to go down into the mines. He slept on a bed of straw. That was it. There was nothing else there. He was ragged, he was poor, he was thin, and he had coal dust all over his face. Church people came and said, what happened? Where's your furniture? What? You look awful. You're an embarrassment to the church. And Van Gogh said, how can I presume to preach to these people if I don't know what their lives are like, their working lives and their living lives? I have no right to preach to them unless I experience what they experience. So he never became an evangelist, which was a good thing. But what happened was, for the history of art and humanity, it was a good thing. So in 1879, he was doing, this is a drawing he did, coal shoveler, 1879. So he was constantly writing letters to his brothers and making little drawings in them and sketches. And one day it occurred to him, oh, this is how I can help other people. These drawings that I'm making and sending back to Brother Teo, I can get them reproduced inexpensively and get them distributed so people will know what these poor people are going through, their living conditions and working lives, and maybe someone with money will come and help them out. So the whole purpose of him becoming an artist, he didn't call himself an artist, an illustrator, he wanted to illustrate the lives of the poor miners and get them help. And that's why and how he became an artist. So, so this is an early one he did also, before he it was rough, he was self-taught. And this is called Miners Going to the Shaft, 1879, 1880. So he went to another mining camp and he kept drawing. And then he left the Parsonage and the mining camps, and he wanted to become a better illustrator. So he went to an art academy in Brussels to improve his drawings. And look at this, and then a year later, look at that.
Wow.
This is from a couple months studying at the art academy, some drawing lessons in Brussels. This was that, and that. Miners' wives carrying sacks, bearers of the burden. And this is his drawing, copy of the Angelus, Jean-Francois Millet's copy of the painting you saw earlier. This is a drawing by Van Gogh. It's quite beautiful. So, his father wasn't that successful of a pastor either, and he was moderately successful. He kept being bounced around from village to village and town to town. So, his father was living and working as a pastor in a Dutch town called Etten, E-T-T-E-N. Van Gogh went back to Etten. It would be, he could save money by living with his parents. And this is called the Garden of the Parsonage with arbor. It's watercolor, chalk, and pencil and paper. And this is where he really shone. And the work he did from 1881, when this was done, through 1885 are my own personal favorite works of his, actually. So this is, I mean, look at the detail. Look at the detail. This is being self-taught. He paid a lot of attention to other artists growing up as a youngster. He was surrounded by art. He visited galleries, Rembrandt, Joseph Israels, Millet. But to actually do it, this was from real life. This is farmers sitting by the fireplace reading, watercolor, chalk, and pencil on paper, 1881. Old man putting dry rice on the hearth, 1881. Pencil, chalk, and watercolor on paper. So has anyone seen these before? Great. I hope to introduce my audiences to some of his early work, and then I'll get on to the sunflowers and the beautiful gardens that he painted. And then this one is Woman Sewing. It's black chalk and watercolor on paper. So these are his early Dutch works before he even went to France. He didn't know about what was going on at the time. His brother was working in one of their uncle's galleries. Theo was working in Paris at one of their uncle's galleries. And eventually, soon after this, his brother was writing him saying, "You've got to come to Paris, you're not going to believe what's going on." Because by then, the Impressionists already had a few, maybe 4 of their Impressionist exhibitions, starting in 1874. And Theo kept writing Vincent saying, "You've got to come here, you're not going to believe the colors and the light and everything that's going on." But it took him a few more years to get there. And then this one, this is the marsh, and this is the kind of place he would go out and pull reeds and sharpen the reeds down and make ink pens out of them to hold, and different widths of the tips. So he had different sizes of his lines. So this is the marsh. And then from Etten in Holland, he moved to The Hague in 1882. And this is called Sorrow. He did a lot. He did a lot of drawings and paintings of men and women also in this position. Distraught, sorrowful, leaning over, elbows on knees, covering their eyes. He did a lot of what were called orphan men. Isn't this stunning? It's so strong. This is old man with top hat, probably graphite lithographic crayon, 1882. So he's called an orphan man, and it's kind of like today we have retirement communities that are founded or organized by different religions, you know, either Protestant or Episcopalian or Jewish. And so at that time, it was the same thing. They lived in religious communities if they had no other family. That's what they were called, orphan men and women, and they lived in these religious retirement communities. This is Workman Resting. It's one of his several lithographs that he did. So it was at this time that his uncles commissioned him to do cityscapes of The Hague, and they paid him. So, what did Vincent do? Did he do nice public gardens? Pretty, you know, people sitting in beautiful little parks? No. Whoops, oh yeah, I want to show you this one too. This is another drawing he did when he lived in The Hague. And then, this is one of the cityscapes he did. This is called Broken Up Street with Diggers. Pencil, ink, and watercolor on paper. And he also did iron foundries and gas works. And he did this. It's called the Patmos, or the Jewish Quarter in The Hague. It's pencil and ink on paper. He started this late one evening. He used to go visit friends. He had a lot of friends in the Jewish Quarter. And intellectuals, booksellers, writers, and then he started this late one night outside, then he went back to his room and finished it late into the night and the next day. Study of a tree. He loved trees. This is, actually, when I first saw this, I thought it was chalk. No, it's pencil, lead pencil, black and white chalk, black ink, and watercolor on paper. He loved trees. He did olive orchards and peach trees and pine and cypress, and he did a lot of paintings and drawings of trees. This is an early one, 1882. One of his cityscapes for his uncle, the poor and the money, a flock of people in front of the lottery office. This is not what they had in mind when they hired him. Black chalk, pencil, watercolor, and ink on paper. But they saw he was good enough, and so they paid him and then hired him to do more. So, and this is Sien, S-I-E-N, that was her nickname. Sien seated, graphite, ink, and sepia on paper. They met in a pub, and Sien was a prostitute and a laundress when they met. And he felt sorry for her and said, "I'll pay you if you can come and pose and model for me." And eventually, he asked her to move in with him. She had a daughter and was pregnant with another child. Now this served three purposes for Van Gogh. One thing I should mention is he always wanted to get married and have a family of his own, and that was never to be. So he invited Sien to live with him, to share a room, much to, can you imagine his pastor father? He's living with a prostitute and a laundress. So this served three purposes. One, he could imagine and pretend that he had his own family, that they were married, it was his children. Two, he had a model anytime he wanted, if she was willing to sit and pose for him. But three, maybe the most important, he was helping someone less fortunate than himself. And that was his whole purpose in life was to help other people. So she served those three purposes for him. They even talked about getting married. Even his brother Theo, who he was really close with, was appalled that he would live with this woman. Here she is. She wasn't exactly a refined woman. This is Sien with cigar sitting on the ground by the stove. Pencil, white chalk, and ink on paper. Another one of those poses. This is Sien, again, sorrow. It took me a few years to realize that sorrow is not Dutch, it's in English, he wrote in English, so this is how comfortable he was speaking and writing in other languages. So then from Etten and The Hague, he moved to the last place he would live in his native country, Nuenen, N-U-E-N-E-N, and this is where he painted the potato eaters. His father, again, was transferred to another town. So this is the parsonage, as seen from the back. Ink, chalk, and paint on paper. And this was his studio. So he moved in with his parents again to save money, and this was his studio. So like I said, he drew and painted every place he lived. I think there's a couple seats here. Are there seats empty next to you? Great. This is probably my favorite. If I could have one thing by Van Gogh, it would be this drawing. I love this drawing. It's called Simply Peasant Woman. He did hundreds and hundreds of drawings to prepare for the potato eaters painting. Chalk drawing. It's so strong. There's not a moment's hesitation in this drawing. The thing about Van Gogh, he felt inside himself the struggle of the people he painted and drew. He could feel their poverty, their physical struggle, their work when they dug up potatoes or beets or carrots. Yeah. I do another talk called Van Gogh Pissarro, the 99%. And I created it a few years ago after seeing an exhibition by Camille Pissarro. And Pissarro he was an anarchist, but non-violent, pacifist anarchist, and he believed that men and women, everyone was equal, and there should be no capitalism, that everyone should have means and be able to have food and clothing and shelter. And so I showed their art side by side. Pissarro was totally at ease with his life. He was at peace with his life. And so Pissarro's paintings and drawings of peasants showed peasants relaxed in their place of work, fine, content. Van Gogh, on the other hand, because he struggled and felt in another way within himself, his peasants aren't at peace. You see them working and bent over. There's a drawing he did, head of a peasant man, pen, pencil, black chalk, brown ink on paper. Can you see okay?
Turn that light off.
Turn that light off? Sure, we'll see if I can see my face. These? Okay. Anything else? No, really. Is everything okay? Everything you see? Okay. So, this head of a peasant man, anyone want to guess the size of this? It's 5 7/8 inches by 4 3/8 inches. Wow. Tiny, tiny. Laying with poplar trees, pencil and ink on paper. He studied perspective all the time. He devised contraptions to study perspective. And then painting in preparation for the potato eaters, head of a peasant woman with white cap, done March, April 1885. And then his first great masterpiece, the potato eaters. No one had ever painted peasants like this before. Peasants were painted either in super realism, 100 years earlier or whatever, like all the brush strokes were blended together, or with the Impressionists, they painted, like I said, Pissarro's peasants were at ease in their environment. But Van Gogh said he wanted the viewer to be able to imagine they were actually tasting the earth and the potatoes. Their whole lives were filled with planting potatoes, digging them up, and eating them. And they lived on potatoes, coffee, and bread. And they posed for this. I'm not sure how long it took. It took a few days, I think, at least. So this is the Potato Eaters, his first great masterpiece. So Theo had been saying, you've got to come and see the Impressionists. You're not going to leave. Come to Paris, come to Paris. But on his way, he went to Antwerp first. And Antwerp, he stayed for 3 months. And this is where he discovered Japanese art. He used to go down to the docks and watch the freighters come in and see barges unload freight wrapped in Japanese newspapers and prints. So this is head of a woman with her hair loose. He took some classes at the Academy of Fine Arts in Antwerp while he was there. He was kicked out of the painting class and sent to the drawing class, and then he got into an argument with the instructor over how to draw the female body. When he was in Antwerp, he went to museums and discovered the paintings of Rubens, who used this beautiful red color in his paintings, and Van Gogh used it. This is Girl from a Cafe, Chantant, seeing her in a cafe. And then just one other from Antwerp. This is Dance Hall with Women Dancing, black and colored chalk on wove paper, 3.5 inches by 6.25 inches. He finally goes to Paris, only he didn't let his brother know he was coming ahead of time. So he went to the Louvre, and he went to the gallery that housed his brother's favorite paintings, thinking Theo wouldn't be so angry with him if he met him in this gallery and he was surrounded by his favorite art. So he sent a messenger to get Theo at the gallery. Theo met him at the Louvre. Vincent went back to Theo's apartment. He got paint everywhere. Now Theo Van Gogh, his brother, was 4 years younger, was dressed very properly. was a clerk, or more than a clerk, in their uncle's gallery, one of the galleries in Paris. Collected antiques, had beautiful Persian, carpets from the East, beautiful furniture, and Vincent moved in and got paint everywhere. And so finally, Theo said, well, we have to move to a larger apartment. They moved to a larger apartment, and he had his own studio. And this is a drawing he did at an Art Academy, or a studio, where he actually met some of the other Impressionist artists, and he got to draw from nudes. So this is male standing nude, pencil and charcoal on paper, and this is 5 studies of a nude girl seated. While he was in Paris, when he first got there, thanks to his brother, who knew all these Impressionist artists, and they had been showing, like I said, they already had several of their first Impressionist exhibitions. He met Renoir, Lautrec, Bernard, Gauguin, Seurat, and Pissarro. He had 3 best friends when he lived in Paris. The artist who did this drawing, it's a pastel drawing of Vincent. Anyone know who did it? Wouldn't guess, I wouldn't have thought it. It's by Toulouse-Lautrec. So we're used to seeing the Moulin Rouge and the Can-Can girls and that, but this was a drawing he did. It's a pastel drawing of Vincent drinking absinthe. That was they used to stay up late drinking a lot. And this is the bottle of absinthe, but it's a pastel drawing by Toulouse-Lautrec. And then the reason I include this is because it's a drawing done by another of his close friends, Lucien Pissarro, who was one of the sons of Camille Pissarro, the founder of the Impressionist movement, along with Monet. So this was done by Lucien, and Van Gogh was very close with the whole Pissarro family, Camille, the father, and then Lucien, the young son. And Lucien actually went to Van Gogh's funeral in Auvers in 1890. But this is a drawing by Lucien. You can guess which one is Van Gogh? It's the one with the folded arms, looking very serious. He's in conversation with an art critic and patron of the arts, an art collector named Felix Fenion. This drawing is a black crayon drawing, and it's only 8 5/8 inches by 6 7/8 inches. So it doesn't matter how small your drawings and paintings are. If they're done with sincerity and honesty and intention, that's all that counts. My opinion. And then this is his third good friend. This is a photograph of Émile Bernard and Van Gogh hanging out in the suburbs of Paris, the Osniers, in 1886, soon after Van Gogh arrived. So there was Toulouse-Lautrec, Lucien Pissarro, and Émile Bernard. This is Émile Bernard, and this is Van Gogh. Van Gogh did not like to be photographed. There are only the 2 photographs I showed you when he was around 12, 13, and around 18, 19. Those are the only ones, and then there's this with his back to us. Don't you wish he had turned around for the picture? He didn't mind being painted. There are a lot of artists that did portraits of him, if you can look it up online. Wonderful portraits of Vincent van Gogh by other artists, but no other photographs. Now, there's one that surfaced several years ago that went around the internet, and it was discovered at a flea market, and it's a photograph of a bunch of artists in a cafe during this time period, 86, 87, and you can see Bernard and Gauguin. And someone said that has to be Vincent van Gogh. It was sent to Holland, and I think it was found in Belgium. It was sent to Holland, to Amsterdam, and the family said, and I knew by looking at it, it didn't look like Van Gogh, but someone wanted it to be Van Gogh, the person who discovered the photograph. Look, I found a photograph of Van Gogh. So this was Émile Bernard and Hague hanging out in the suburbs of Paris, talking about art. He lived in Paris 2 years, and during those 2 years he did 227 oil paintings and hundreds of drawings. It takes me 2 months to do one work of art. I cannot imagine. But that's what he did. There were no cell phones, no computers, no Facebook. He just devoted himself to to art. That was his whole life, and to reading. So this is a pair of shoes. You can see how his colors changed. This is a pair of shoes done in 1886 when he got there, or boots with laces. It's an oil painting. 1 year later, look how the colors changed. So he, like I said, he met and saw the work of Renoir and Lautrec and Gauguin and Bernard and Cezanne and other artists, and he became very aware of the light. He just went, oh my gosh, all this time I've been using all these dark earthy colors, right? And look at this, look at these. So isn't that fabulous, just to see the difference? He did a lot of shoes. Now he used to go to flea markets. He wouldn't buy new shoes. It had nothing to do with money. It had to do with he wanted to show work and labor. That was what was important to him. He wanted to show working people and what they wore and how they lived. And so he found old work boots at flea markets and shoes. One of his first sunflower paintings, he did this in Paris. It was at the Metropolitan, 2 cut sunflowers. I saw this in Philadelphia a few years ago. At the Philadelphia Museum of Art, there was an exhibit on the influence of Japanese art on Van Gogh's art. And this was one of them. And the blue is much deeper, really rich, deep, darker blue than what you see now surrounding the sunflower. This is Père Tanguy. Père Tanguy was an art supply dealer. Japanese art. See all the Japanese art? Japanese art was very popular, very fashionable at the time. And Vincent and his brother Teo, between them, collected somewhere between 300 and 500 works of Japanese art. And they dealt in it. They bought and sold Japanese art. So this is Père Tanguy. He was an art supply dealer. He loved all the new artists. He had a stove in the middle of his art supply store. They'd come in and get oils and tubes. Tubes had been invented a couple decades earlier. Oil paint in tin tubes, so artists no longer had to grind pigments and add oil and make their own paint. So they could go into an art supply store and see something that looked like our tubes of toothpaste now and buy oil paint. And that enabled them to stay out in the field when they were doing plein air paintings and not have run out of paint and have to go back to their studio and make more paint. But anyway, so he really liked, this Père Tanguy was wonderful, and he really liked the new art that all these young people were doing. And when they didn't have money to pay for their art supplies, he said, that's okay, don't worry. I'll put your paintings in the front window, and when someone comes by, they'll look and they'll want to buy it, that way I'll get paid. So that almost happened. So there'd be a Cezanne or a Van Gogh in the window, and someone would come by and say, how much for that? And Cezanne would say, it's not for sale. He didn't want to sell them. Père Tanguy, the art supply dealer, loved this new art, and he kept it in a back room for himself, and he never collected money for the art supplies. And his wife rather, used to stand, this is all from letters that I read, used to stand behind a curtain and go, psst, psst, get their money, oh, it's okay, they'll pay me another time. So anyway, Van Gogh, so you see the lower right, Japanese painting? That's Van Gogh's rendition of it. There it is, here, and here. So Van Gogh copied art, not to copy precisely, but to learn. Whenever he copied other artists' work, it was so he could learn something about it, either about how it was drawn or painted, the brushwork, and he made it very much his own. So this is the courtesan. And then this lovely woman, Agostina Segatori, he had an affair with her. Or a woman at a table in the Café du Tambourine, which was the name of her restaurant. And you see the Japanese art on the wall behind her? So Vincent was able to display he and his brother's collection of Japanese art. They were lovers, they had an affair, he had no money to pay for food. I mean, he was living with his brother, so his brother didn't have to give him as much money as when he was not living with him. So he didn't have money to pay for food, so he said, well, I'll give you a work of art in exchange for a meal. And she said, sure. And Then they had a big fight, they broke up. And he said he wanted all of his art back. And she refused to give it back to him. She said, no, I fed you. So the thing about her is, I really like her. So at this time in the 1880s, she's very unusual. She's independent. There she is smoking a cigarette, having a glass of beer. Look at that hat. She owns her own business. She's an independent businesswoman. That was very unusual at this time. At this time, Mary Cassatt and Bertha Morisot lived in Paris. They couldn't go out unchaperoned. It was not proper to be unchaperoned. Mary Cassatt, who never married, was so frustrated because she wanted to go to cafes and her male friends' studios, and she had to wait till someone escorted her out of her home. So for this woman, Agustina Segatori, to sit there fully confident, with a beer and a cigarette, and look at that umbrella, and have her own business. It was great. So this is one of the women Van Gogh was involved with. And then this is called Interior of a Restaurant, another restaurant, and there's artwork on the walls where Van Gogh would hang his work and the work of his other artist friends at the time. So you're going to see that when he lived in Paris, he tried different kinds of brush strokes. Some were little pointillistic ones like this, and then some were longer. Well, here's another short little dabs. This one is called People Walking in a Public Garden at Asnières. And then this one, where there were longer brush strokes. This is Banks of the Seine. So he was experimenting. He was learning. It was all about learning when he lived in Paris. He was trying out new colors, new brush strokes. And then this one, Vegetable Garden in Montmartre. He loved the color yellow. It was his favorite color. He said it was the color of the divine, of God. This has now become kind of like Las Vegas with the neon lights, but this is how Montmartre looked back then in the 1880s. And then this is, he often did paintings of mothers and children, or mothers by the cradle of their baby, because he always wanted to be married and have his own family, and that was never to be. So this is called Woman Sitting by a Cradle. These are all done in Paris. And then, like I said, he did 39 self-portraits in his entire life. 31 of them were done in Paris, 27 were oil paintings, and 4 were drawings. I'd love to show you all of them, but I'm going to show you 3, starting in 1886, when he first arrived. Self-portrait with a pipe. Next year, 1887, self-portrait with a straw hat. In 1888, self-portrait in front of an easel. So he lived in Paris for 2 years. He was drinking too much, staying up too late, hanging out with the other artists late into the night. And the artists were starting to leave. Cézanne was going to where he did the paintings of the mountains that he went out into the countryside to paint. Gauguin and Bernard had moved to Brittany. Other artists were moving away from Paris. And Van Gogh, when he lived in Paris, studied Eastern art and religion, including Buddhism, when he lived in Paris. So he was very intrigued by Japanese art and the whole, anything Japanese. So he thought he'd move to the south of France to Arles, and he thought it would be all sunny and kind of like the Japan of the South. Only when he got there, well, he left in February of 1888, it was snowing. So this was the first painting he did when he was there, a snowy landscape with Arles in the background. He went out the first 3 days in a row in the snow and did a painting. But then spring came, and this is why he moved there. Orchard with blossoming plum trees. And you can see the influence of Japanese art. One of the influences is black outlines. In a lot of Japanese art, you see figures and buildings outlined in black. Also, the subject matter going off the top of the page. You didn't see the top of the trees. They went off the canvas. And then he painted this, Peach Tree in Blossom, and it's dedicated to his cousin Mauve. I forgot to mention, I know this so much, I knew I was going to forget to mention. When he lived in The Hague, he studied with his cousin by marriage named Anton Mauve, who gave him art supplies and taught him a bit about oil painting. And in addition to his uncles commissioning him to do drawings, he studied with Mauve a little bit. And then he, like I said, he gave his own art lessons, he took piano lessons, and but he found out when he was living in Arles in the south of France that Mauve had died while he was painting this. So this is called Souvenir de Mauve, or In Memory of Mauve. And underneath here, you can't really see it, he also signed his brother's name, Theo, because like I said, he told Theo that you have as much to do with these paintings as I do. Without you, I couldn't be doing them. So when this was dry, after he finished it, it dried, and then he rolled it up and sent it to Mauve's widow. And then this is Joseph Rouland, the postman. This is kind of like the Père Tanguy, Père Tanguy in Paris. So this is like the father figure in the south of France, and this was a postman who knew nothing about art, but he would quickly deliver his post, his mail, and then go out on his rounds, and then go out and find Vincent out in the countryside and watch him paint. And he just loved watching him. He very much admired this working man, Vincent van Gogh, who was a man of the people. And in fact, there's a story when Van Gogh was out in the countryside painting and drawing, he saw a farmer. And it was the middle of the week, and he said to the farmer, would you post for me? Could we meet here again tomorrow and can I paint you? And the farmer said yes. So the next day he went back and there was the farmer dressed in his Sunday clothes, all dressed up. He's like, no, that's not what I wanted. I wanted you to wear work clothes. But anyway, so Joseph Rouland, the postman, he had several children, and his wife, and Van Gogh painted all of them, and his wife and their children, and they invited him for evening meals. So Vincent van Gogh was he was being ripped off. He was renting some kind of a room somewhere, and he was paying a lot of money, and Rouland